and we'll get started.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you for being here and taking time out of your day. My name's Alexis Brooks. I'm an attorney to small businesses, and I base my practice here at HAYVN in Darien. And as Felicia said, hiring your first employee can require a lot of support and knowledge, and the more you know and the more support you have, the better off you are. And I'd like to introduce Eileen Springer. She's from Central Park Executive Coaching. She's the founder, and she will be giving you her perspective as an experienced coaching and HR executive. And first, before we begin, I'm an attorney, so I always include a disclaimer that basically states this webinar, this HAYVN Halftime, is really for informational purposes only, and so you shouldn't rely on it for your own situation. And we will move on. And I'm going to hand it over to Eileen to introduce herself again, and also get started with doing your due diligence prior to hiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. Yes, as Alexis said, I am an executive coach, but I also provide HR advisory to businesses. And I spent 30 years in a variety of human resources roles and have worked in businesses in a variety of industries and different sizes. So it's always exciting for me to be able to share that experience and knowledge, particularly with those that are just getting started in a business and thinking about hiring their first employee. I first just wanted to ask, by a show of hands, how many of you have employees or are thinking about hiring employees? We've got someone in the room here. Yeah, Liz. And Kate and Jessica, I can't see you. I don't know if you want to weigh in and let me know what your situation is, but we'll try to target our remarks based on what your situation is.
And please feel free to use the chat function. And if you have questions throughout our talk, feel free to unmute yourself. It's a small group. This can be interactive, or you can post a question on the chat function. We'll try to get to it. Thank you.
Great. Yes. Feel free if we're going into something. Okay, Jessica, thank you. If we're not providing enough detail for something that's really relevant to you, that's the benefit of being a smaller group. So just let us know if you have questions along the way. So to get started, you know, we've all heard the news about there being high unemployment during the pandemic, but the reality is that there have been millions of small businesses that have been created in the past year. And interestingly, almost half of those have been started by women. But the other side of the coin is that right now we're experiencing what's become known as the she-cession. And what we mean by that is lots of women have left the workforce and are either opting out of working or looking for new ways to work. So this can either make it more difficult to hire employees or can work to your advantage depending on what your needs are in hiring employees. So these are important considerations as you think about hiring employees for your own business. And while it doesn't seem like it should be difficult to hire someone right now, hiring the right person and thinking about retaining the right person requires some thoughtful planning. So as you see on that slide, you know, here's some things you want to think about to properly do your due diligence as you get started on this. So if you've decided you no longer want to be the one-woman band, ask yourself, what do you need from an employee? Sit down and write out the list of duties of what is needed. What do you want from an employee? What are you looking to potentially hand off that's work that you're doing now? And give some consideration. Do you need to hire someone as a full-time employee? Or is it perhaps a situation where a part-time employee or multiple part-time employees would be more appropriate? And what is the level of skill that's required for the jobs that you're thinking about? what is the overall growth strategy for the company? Can you can you get by with contractors or temporary employees for a while? Or do you need to start right away with full-time employees? And thinking about that in alignment with what your longer-term strategy for your business is always a good idea. And then finally, you want to consider the cost of having someone on payroll and the legal and financial obligations that come with that. You have to think about things like taxes, administrative costs, fringe benefit cost. So those are all some important requirements to think about when you're bringing in your first employees. And now Alexis is going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of those legal considerations.
Yeah, so thank you. When you're thinking about either hiring full-time or part-time or hiring as a contractor or an employee, it's important to know that you are subject to federal regulations and state statutes that may actually dictate what type of employee you can hire, what type of worker. So what I'd like to go into is this decision between independent contractor and employee, because I think that's the very first question that an employer or company, it's a decision that they need to make. And just keep in mind, there are general factors that indicate an employment relationship. So even though you might want that contractor relationship as a company because there are fewer obligations to you, just know that if you exert a certain amount of control over where, when, how many hours the worker works, whether you're furnishing all the tools, whether you're giving them a lot of direction, how you're paying them, the length of the relationship, all that plays into whether or not it's legitimately a contractor versus an employee. And the risk of misclassification there is that you could owe, if it's determined that you actually hired an employee or it was an employment relationship, even though you wanted them to be a contractor, it could result in fees and back taxes that the state deems that you owe. So it's important to get some guidance, especially if it's a little bit murky. And some other things to keep in mind: as soon as you hire someone, you are subject to federal regulations such as the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is really meant to protect the worker. It originated in 1938, and just some quick facts, it was designed to give a minimum wage to workers and to provide some parameters as to eligibility for overtime pay, child labor protections, that type of thing. Initially, the minimum wage was 25 cents, 1938. So now today, I think it's $13, $12 in Connecticut. It's going up $1 per year. And you are subject to those regulations. So it's important that you get some guidance and make sure that you comply. Some other things to keep in mind: there's a determination that you need to make between whether a position, an employee position, is exempt or non-exempt. And there are tests that you go through to determine. So some typical exempt jobs, and exempt means you're exempt from paying overtime. Non-exempt means that you would pay overtime over and above 40 hours. And usually it's 1.5 times the pay, at least in Connecticut it is. I'm licensed to practice in Connecticut. So, my input right now is more Connecticut focused. But just know that there are tests out there to determine. Some typical jobs that might be exempt are ones where the employees using their own discretion and judgment on a regular basis, executive positions, administrative positions where they're using their independent judgment to make decisions and to do their job. Professionals, some examples of non-exempt might be secretary, bus driver, and that's the gist, but we can go more into that if you would like. Some other regulations that you will be subject to are Family Medical Leave Act regulations. And please know, in Connecticut, there is a new FMLA legislation that requires the employer to permit paid leave, paid family leave, after the employee has been with them for a certain amount of time. And this is new. And the way they're funding it is through employee contributions into a state fund. And they'll start paying that out in 2022, January 2022. So as soon as you have, an employee, you are subject to these federal regulations. So it's important that you inform yourself of them and you get some guidance. Also, just know there are many HR policies out there that are recommended. I think for small businesses, you may not need a full handbook, but it is advisable to think long and hard as to which policies are important to put into place, and to have that employee, have them ready to go, so that when you do hire employees, you have them there ready to present them as the onboarding process. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Eileen to discuss recruitment and selection.
Great, thank you. So as I'm listening to Alexis, I'm thinking, wow, it sounds like so much responsibility when you hire someone. The reality is a lot of the risk can be minimized if you're really thoughtful and careful about how you're selecting your employees. And this is just touching on a few important points as you think about going into the hiring process. So first of all is the sourcing strategy. So you've gotten to a place in your business where you've decided to expand and get more help, to bring on board employees. And the first thing you want to think about is, how are you going to source those employees? You want to have a strategy for getting a candidate slate together. Going into this just thinking you're going to place an ad and they're going to land on your doorstep usually is not a good strategy. Being really thoughtful and deliberate about, how you're going to go about sourcing the right kind of talent. Are you going to place ads yourself? And almost all ads are on job boards now. Almost everyone, conducts a job search online these days, or at least uses that as an important part of their research when starting a job search. So are you going to advertise yourself, or might you go to a staffing agency and invest in the support of an agency where there are professional recruiters and sourcers that do this all the time that can help to save you some time? The other consideration is, are you looking for quality versus quantity? Yes, it's really great that you can go online and get hundreds of resumes, but it also can be a nightmare to get hundreds of resumes and have to call through them and decide who is it worth spending time screening on the phone or in person. And typically the very best candidates come through referrals, through people through customers, people who already have some understanding as to who you are and what your business is about. There's also a trade-off between the speed of the search and the time that it may take for being more selective. And again, as part of your strategy, just having an understanding, what is your sense of urgency? Or can you afford to proactively start looking for talent before you need it, or before the next person resigns and you have to train someone to get them up to speed? So all of that is a consideration. Thinking about what resources you're going to need to support you in this search. It's always best if you have a support system in selecting your talent. Is someone else going to help you interview? Sometimes businesses will have their customers help with the interviewing, or if they're working with a contractor or someone that's leaving, help them be part of the interview process. Someone that can provide another perspective or another point of view other than yourself, in addition to, again, considering going through an agency and using those resources. And then finally, to think about how diversity plays into the strategy of your business. Think about what's good for business and what value comes from diversity of thought when someone else is coming into your business and providing a different perspective. Is it someone else that can be more reflective of the community that you're operating in? And is it someone that is going to help your customers be able to better identify with your business? So these are all things that you want to think about in advance as you think about your strategy. And now I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk more specifically about what happens once you get to the interview process. So to have an effective hiring process, you want to think about what your ideal candidate looks like. And your ideal candidate really should be defined by what the business objectives are for that particular position. So you want to use a deliberate and consistent approach to evaluating candidates. So for example, you should be asking the same or very similar questions to each candidate that's interviewing for the job. And you want to be assessing the candidates against the same job description and competencies and skills consistently throughout the process. And also ideal is to have the same group of interviewers interviewing each candidate so that you have that consistency, and that also decreases any legal risk that you would have if someone felt that it was a discriminatory process. And most importantly, you want your hiring decisions to be based on data and evidence. And this would eliminate any unconscious bias. And the best way to do this is to use behavioral interview questions. You want to get what I call the proof points from the candidates that you're interviewing. So if a job requires them to perform a particular task in a particular situation, you'd want to ask questions where you'd say something like, tell me about a time when you had to use these skills or you had to deal with this kind of situation. And that would help you get those proof points and the evidence that you would need to know if someone's likely be able to perform the job. You also want to be able to distinguish between who's a really good interviewee and who's a really good candidate for the job. Sometimes people present really well, but it doesn't necessarily mean they can perform the job. So you want to spend enough time with the candidate to be able to make that distinction and to get underneath more than just how they're presenting. You want to think about their growth potential. Job knows to, and you also want to form career goals with what is your because if you don't go through a lot of time and investment in training someone, then have them leave 6 months or a year. So thinking about that, as well as getting a sense of one's loyalty, would be something that you'd want to consider. As you go through this process, what tends to happen is that you learn and iterate along the way. So the more candidates you see, sometimes that will help to shape your thinking about what you really want in a role. And I see this happen a lot for new managers or new business owners that haven't done a lot of this yet. And sometimes it's seeing what's out there and doing that calibration that will help you learn along the way. I mean, sometimes the bar can be really high and then you don't really realize that's unrealistic until you start to speak to people, and vice versa. Sometimes you can find that earlier in career candidates who have really sharp technical skills, for example, can provide just as much as someone that you thought what you needed with a lot of seasoning. And then finally, it's really important to consider culture fit. Most hiring mistakes rarely happen because people don't have the skills for the job, but rather it's personality fit or culture fit that gets in the way of success. So now I'm going to turn it back to Alexis to go into some more detail around some of the protocols you want to keep in mind to avoid discriminatory practices.
Yeah, so to build on what Eileen said with regard to interviewing, keeping it unbiased with selection and recruitment and interviewing, and keeping the line of questioning appropriate to go in that direction. You want to make sure that you avoid any sort of appearance of discriminatory practices. So that means you need to not delve into the personal information about someone. Okay, it really needs to be the questioning, the meetings, the application need to be centered on skills and the objectives and the achievements that you hope that this position will realize. So stay away from small talk centered on personal lives, and if you need to talk about something mundane, make it the weather, okay? Make it, oh, what'd you do this weekend? But don't delve into personal information as to where someone lives, when did they graduate. Those lines of questioning are dangerous territories. You'll want to check references, but again, make sure that the questions that you ask, the references that are provided are centered on dates and titles, and a little bit open-ended, and shut it down if it gets too personal. And when it comes to background checks in Connecticut, you can do a criminal background check. It cannot be at the time of applying for a job. So it cannot weed somebody out from the application process. You need to wait for that narrowing of the candidate pool, or do conduct a background check at the time of offering, and that's Connecticut's, it's called the ban the box law. And it's designed to promote this public policy that assists people and helps them back into society and doesn't preclude them from obtaining a job. And you also need to be a little careful with what you do with that information. And you need to look at the candidate, as a whole, and not base your decision solely on what information is given to you. And also, if you're interviewing for a position or trying to fill a position where they're going to handle funds, it may be appropriate then to obtain a credit check. But that's an exception to the rule. Generally, you don't go in that direction. Consent for obtaining background checks is required. And again, the idea is don't give the appearance of discriminatory practices. We're going to move to offering the position. I'm just going to state some basics that are important, and where you might need to obtain some outside help from an attorney or an HR executive. It's important to put it down on paper, obviously. So if it's an employee, then you want to capture the terms, the salient terms of the employment relationship in this offer letter or in this executive agreement or contractor agreement. You want to state on record that it's at-will employment. Connecticut's an at-will state, most states are, and that means you can, either party can leave the employment relationship at any time for any reason. While an employer might want 2 weeks notice, the employee actually doesn't have to give it. So there are laws here that can help the employer and also help the employee get out of a relationship if need be. There are required tax and immigration documents that an employee will need to complete. You can make that conditional upon employment. If they don't do it, then the offer can be rescinded. And then you might be offering a position or trying to fill a position where a confidentiality, non-compete, non-solicit agreement is appropriate. Might be a position where they are in sales and they have client lists, or it includes marketing strategy that you really want to keep, that needs to be confidential. And so consider presenting that to your prospective employer or contractor at the time of the offer. And then again, in the legal materials, in these offering materials, it should be restated, the job classification. You're either an employee or you're not, and that should be stated very explicitly. You're either exempt from overtime or you're non-exempt and you are eligible for overtime. That should be stated as well. And now we're going to move on to some details about onboarding.
Thanks. So it sounds like a lot that you have to think about to hire an employee and make sure you're doing everything right. And one of the mistakes I see a lot of businesses make is they put so much emphasis and effort on the hiring process, they lose sight of how important it is to onboard employees properly. And this is as important as this whole process in hiring employees, because you've gone through all of this effort, all of this investment. You sure don't want to bring someone on board and then have them leave within the first few months because they felt forgotten, or the job wasn't exactly what they thought it was going to be, or somehow things change and you're not helping them adapt. So I can't emphasize enough, and I have found this to be particularly relevant with millennials and Gen Z, that there is an expectation that you're paying close attention, particularly in the first few months. And from a liability perspective, it's also in the best interest of you as the business leader to evaluate closely in the first 90 days. Have regular check-ins with your new employee. Give regular feedback, whether it's positive or constructive feedback. It's really important that you start off on the right foot with creating a high feedback, comfortable, ongoing communication. It's also really important to establish a process early on as a business to have regular performance reviews with your employees. At a minimum, annual reviews, but in an ideal scenario, quarterly or twice a year, to have actual written reviews, so that there is documentation. And again, it doesn't have to be done with the mindset of I'm going to cover myself legally so I don't get sued. It's just a good practice to have. And employees really like getting that regular feedback. They like the structure, and they want to know what's going well or what isn't. They want an opportunity to talk about their career and their career development. So starting that practice early on is important. And as Alexis mentioned, is ideally you would have an employee handbook from the beginning. It can be something basic, but it's a good thing to have as you start to bring employees on board.
And here are just some COVID-19 considerations that have come up in my practice, and that you may want to consider just addressing if you're going to be hiring people, or if you have people already on staff. You should probably have a remote worker policy. Some of my clients, had one from years ago, and it's really not accurate today. Now their whole workforce, 6 to 12 employees, are all remote. And so it needs to be beefed up a little bit. Just need to be clearer. Surrounding COVID-19, mask wearing is becoming, it's still there, put it that way. So and it needs to be clearly communicated what the expectations are. And just some other facts about COVID right now in the workplace: the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, which is this emergency extended family medical leave act. It expires soon, but I anticipate that it'll be extended. But just know there's legislation out there that gives the opportunity to employees to have leave due to COVID. And also, I think most importantly for employers, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, just came out with a statement in the last week that says employers can mandate vaccines. It depends, and it has to also comply with, offering reasonable accommodations for disabilities. But that's a big statement, and something to think about. And just know, if you're collecting information from employees, and this goes, across the whole process of the interviewing and the onboarding process, if you're collecting information, it needs to be stored properly. If it's medical information, it needs to be stored separately from the personnel file. And just some added obligations, and not to scare you, but think about your data security protection plan. More and more information is being, filtered to employers. make sure you've got a plan to secure that data, and to have maybe a cyber risk insurance policy. You're going to be obligated, have state obligations once you hire somebody. So unemployment insurance, you need to be registered with the state. You need to get workers' compensation insurance. You may have to post things in your workspace, and just know that you're subject to new, pending or new Connecticut legislation that passes. And there is some coming down the line, especially when it comes to discriminatory practices with hiring. So keep abreast of it and get some help from people like Eileen, myself, and don't feel like you have to navigate it alone. So here's our contact information if you need to call us or reach out by email, and we are happy to offer you a free consultation. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute.
Yeah, thanks. And I do see in the chat, Kate, thank you for that comment, that there is a lot of information about the younger generations, but it's so true that for generations beyond that, who've been in the workforce longer, they may feel just as left out or need the same type of feedback as well. So true. And interestingly, when I did my research for my certification in executive coaching, I actually did my research on this topic. And the reality is that what millennials want from their employers and in coaching is very, very similar to what the generation beyond them wanted, or I should say ahead of them wanted. So it's not so dissimilar, and this is an important thing to keep in mind in terms of being a good employer and looking to retain your employees and keep your employees engaged, a good practice for all of your employees. In HR, we have this saying that the worst employee you can have is what we call the disengaged stayer. The person that stays in their job but is disengaged or disgruntled. So you want to avoid having that as part of your labor force. So thank you for bringing up that point. We'd love to open it up for questions. If any of you have questions about what we've spoken about or anything in addition to what we've spoken about.
We have one in-person participant. And we're happy that we're having this hybrid event. So hopefully as time goes on, we'll have more in-person participants.
Yeah. And this is my first time showing up in person.
Great.
Well, since I'm doing little things, but I'm always virtual. And it's strange not to have my computer here doing it. But I've run across an opportunity that's so big that I know I need outside help with it. I don't know if you want me to tell you what it is. Or
Sure.
So it's big. It's really exciting. I'm a photographer, and my name is Katie Settle. And there's the amphitheater coming in Bridgeport.
Oh yeah.
And it's the old Bluefish Stadium. They're going to seat about 5,700 people. And for the past 8 years, I've been a concert photographer along with other stuff at Fairfield Theater Company. And I wrote you.
Can you speak a little louder?
Sure.
You speak into that. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, you can just yell. It's
awesome.
okay.
Yeah, just yell. So I've gotten this opportunity where I've become the house photographer at the amphitheater, which is a huge score, but they don't pay photographers for concert work generally. So what was offered to me is the entire amphitheater to photograph fans and then sell them the images. And I can set up whatever I want. So it's more bringing in people to walk around and take pictures. And it's really, it could turn into a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah.
So I know what I need is enthusiastic, young, photo enthusiasts, and to pay them a certain amount. They will get to experience the concert, but also interact with people. So my first question would be about like, this is a lot, to start. But I'm so glad to know, and I think one of the greatest things I heard was to ask all of them the same questions so I can continue. But I'm wondering about, I don't want to jump in too quickly and do full-time employees. I'm wondering about independent contractors and if that might be a fit for this. And if this is too many questions and I'm hijacking this,
No, I think it's the first question that many people ask. And so we would have to just delve into how you're going to operate and how you're going to interact with these people. And so I'd be happy to, sit down with you and collect information and provide some advice.
that would be great.
Yeah. I think that would be good to make sure there's a clear understanding as to the business model and then how to match a labor strategy to go with what your business model is.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Could you explain though the difference, like when you would do independent contracting versus when you would do a regular employment? Is that
Right. So it has to do with how much control you need to have over these people who will be, basically, providing support to your business. And if they are already doing this type of job for other companies, there's a whole kind of list of questions you would go through and ask, yourself, and also see what their, how they work as well. But generally, it's how much control do you need over that? Are you going to be telling them to come at a certain time and stay for a certain number of hours and do things under your direction and on a regular basis? And then it might be veering off to the employee relationship. But if not, you might be able to pay them as a contractor. But there might be a point when you have to move them over to employee status. It really is dependent on the set of facts. Yeah.
I had a question. Is there like the things that you talked about, Eileen, is that something that you offer to small businesses to do?
Yeah.
And so like, because, as a business owner, you have a million things that you're trying to do, and to deal with the HR component is like, I would rather just, pass that over to someone else.
Yeah, so that's exactly the type of work that I do. So I not only do I do coaching, but I do HR advisory work. But the businesses that hire me are typically too small to have their own HR department. And they only have occasional HR needs that come up. And so then that's when they'll call me. So it's either on a project basis or on some sort of, retainer that, I'm available when they have an HR need that comes up. And often those needs are talent related. So that's exactly what I do.
So you would put together a proposal and decide which way it would.
Exactly. We'll do a needs assessment to understand where the business is today, what their current needs are, and what they anticipate their needs are going to be for the future. And then put together some sort of plan, either a project plan or something that's ongoing, so that it's more of like an on-call situation.
And then something that we did with the employees once they were employed, we did strength finders, which was so much fun.
Yeah.
But is that something you can do before you hire someone, or?
So yes, but first of all, you want to make sure that any assessment that you use is validated and legally defensible. I said that for you, Alexis. And then you should never have that be the basis for not hiring someone. It should be something in addition to a robust evaluation process for someone. Ideally, you would use it more for the onboarding process to get a better understanding of the person, maybe how they think, how they prefer to work, and use it more toward their development. But you do have to be careful if you're using assessments to rule out people. Yes, but assessments are often used as one of many factors in considering people for employment, just depending on what type of job it is. Particularly, I find for sales and business development roles, it can be really useful.
So does anybody else have any questions? Kate, Kate, raising her hand, so.
Yeah, I just have a quick little question. Are there any?
I can't hear you, Kate.
Oh, how about now? Is
Try
this better
again.
now?
Do you
Is
want to
it
put
better
your
now?
question in the chat? I can't quite
Okay,
hear you.
yeah, I'll do that and I'll put it in the chat.
And
I
while
have a
we're waiting for her
question, too.
question, I want to give a shout out to my intern, Emma Gibbons, who is, yes, sitting right there. She put together these slides for
Beautiful
us
presentation.
and it's very helpful, and very intelligent, and heading to Bowdoin in the fall. So congratulations to her.